Hello and welcome to the Gamedev London podcast, a community of amazing people who love talking about and sharing their love for the details behind making games, whether or not they're actually in London. I'm your host. I'm Oscar Clark, he, him pronouns, and I'm here on a quest to understand everything you wanted to know about game dev, but never dared to ask. Today, I am joined by Steve Bromley, and I'm going to bring him on screen. Steve, how are you doing? You're a game user researcher, and it turned out we have some mutual connections in the history of games user research. Do you want to introduce yourself and tell everybody what you do?
Yeah, of course. And thank you for the wonderful introduction. So my name's Steve Bromley. I am a games user researcher, which I have been doing in the games industry for over a decade now. As you mentioned, the games industry is a very small place, isn't it? So you bump into the same people again and again, and it's always a good idea to be on your best behavior because of that. What does a games user researcher do? So as you know, playtesting is a really essential part of how everyone makes games. Lots of developers and designers and people make sure that playtesting is an integral part of how they're making games. What we do as games user researchers is we bring in some best practice from UX and from science to structure those playtests better and make sure that we are confident that we are running sensible experiments, learning reliable results, and getting the type of quality information that you need to make all those essential game design decisions that our developers, our designers, our producers, our artists need to do their job well.
I think that's really interesting. Particularly one thing I think is interesting about applying the science of understanding how to test is that the influence of observer factors. I don't want to get all quantum physics because it's nothing to do with that, but there is some truth in the fact that if you know that I am watching you while you're playing, it's going to impact your behavior. And I think when we look at playtesting, there's a massive difference between us playing the game with somebody else to see how it how the experience plays, particularly with board game design and card game design and stuff like that. And when you're dealing practically with observing what a real player might do with that game. Do you want to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think that's a really sensible point. And obviously, as you say, when you're aware you're being observed, your behavior is going to change. And that's something that as user researchers, we're really aware of. If we're bringing people into usability labs, there's a whole bunch of steps we take to try and minimize that effect, but it still exists. And so you have to combine it with other ways of gathering information on players' behavior, looking at analytics, looking at telemetry, looking at their post-launch behavior is really important. Another side of this as well, though, is that observer effect is magnified tenfold if you are the one who made the game. If the player thinks, oh, I'm playing in front of the designer who made it and they're really proud of what they made and they're showing me something they're really proud of, they're not going to be honest. Both on a conscious level, they're going to hold back, and also unconsciously, that's going to change how you feel and make your opinions and your behavior not really represent what we'd see in the real world with people who don't know you personally. That's why
I think it's also part of that is really interesting. In my experience, is that some people will become ultra critical because they think that's what you want to hear, whereas others will be ultra complimentary because they don't want to offend you. And I think it's very much a personality thing. So you can't even say, "Oh, I'll just dial the knob down a bit." Is that true in your experience?
I think that's really sensible, yes. And that is one of the challenges of... So another part of the role, obviously, I could talk a lot about different parts of the role in a minute, but one part of the role is that actual moderation, being with a player in the room, being able to get high quality feedback back from them. And one of the challenges we see is that players, it's not a very natural situation for players. They think they're there to do a job. They don't understand that what we really want is you just to be a real player. Just do what you really would at home. Don't do anything different. But they think they're expected to impress us or to give negative feedback because we're after negative feedback. And again, that's the type of bias we want to be avoiding.
And often they're being paid to attend for their time. I mean, not a lot of money. We're talking about 20, 40, 50 quid, something like that. But it's common to do that because that's a necessary step to separate their kind of, you are just somebody to you are a research subject and we are valuing your time. And again, I think that shows a different... I mean, we probably want to take a little bit of a step back because I think that there is a bunch of things going on when we're trying to understand what, I mean, let's face it, what we're trying to do is find the fun.
Mhm.
But we're trying to find the fun in a number of clarified ways. So find the fun in a commercial structure that is scalable, that is engaging, that is retaining, all these kind of different factors. And each game is going to have a different balance of what it's trying to find out.
Mhm.
If you're starting this process off, what's the first thing you think a game developer needs to think about?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the ways that we start with the teams that we work with is by making them recognize that their ideas, whether they're a designer, an artist, or whatever their creative role is, should be treated as a hypothesis. You think that players are going to understand what you're presenting to them and they're going to react in the way you want, whether that's they're going to have fun, whether it's going to be a sad moment, get the type of emotional response you're expecting. But until you validate that, you don't know if your hypothesis is true or not. You don't know if players are going to misunderstand or not uh, be able to do it, or have other usability or comprehension issues that you couldn't imagine. One of the
But
yeah,
let's
go.
dig in a little bit into the word hypothesis, though, because I think there is a
Mhm.
genuine scientific method going on here. And a hypothesis isn't just, I've got an idea.
Mhm.
To me, a hypothesis is something which is disprovable.
Mhm.
And I think, one of the things that I think is difficult to get right when you think about design is that we need to find ways and angles and avenues where we can accept the truth of a failure. And I think part of that is setting an expectation of what success looks like before you run the test. Not just
Exactly.
what it is to test, but how you measure that test and what is the threshold below which isn't good enough or needs change.
I think that's exactly it. So, coming back to your question about the first point, really the first point is that objective setting with teams, understanding
Yeah.
what their design intent is, what they're trying to achieve, understanding what success or failure looks like.
Mm.
And then that raw information, a user researcher can take away, and we can design a study around that. We can say,
Yeah.
okay, let's test that. Let's understand if you are getting the response and the success measures that you're expecting from what you're putting in front of players. Um, it's quite a rigorous process because we're trying to be scientific and take on that UX best practice.
Yeah.
But I think that's one of the advantages that we add compared to informal playtesting, where people just want to see what people think, but they haven't pre-thought about the hypothesis or what success looks like. It's adding rigor to that process, which is really
Yeah.
important.
I think it does. I think that rigor is so critical, but I think there's also other aspects to it because quite a lot of the things we want to do, we can't just sit there and go, right, so there's a checklist of yeses. So you do these things, and then that equals fun. I don't think a checklist equals fun.
Mm-hmm.
As much as I'd like that to be that easy, sadly, I don't think it is. My feeling is, though, this is one of the reasons why I think we need to, for those who don't understand the difference, can I get you to qualify the difference between a qualitative process, which is largely what we're talking about, and a quantitative process, which is
Mm-hmm.
generally more statistical based. Do you want to kind of explain that to people?
Yes, so user researchers have a range of methods that they draw upon to answer their questions, and depending on the type of question that the team has at the time, we'll pick the right method.
Hmm.
Some of those methods are what we call qualitative, which is often very rich, deep data based on observing players and what their behavior is, listening to what players are saying, looking at players' understanding and seeing what they understand and they don't understand. And that kind of depth data is really important for making change to see if you're getting the right kind of emotional response from your game that you expect and making the right kind of changes. In contrast, some of the other questions we get are what we call quantitative questions, largely ones about measurement. So other types of questions you might get asked include: is the difficulty of this game correct? Are players leveling up at the level we expect? What's a churn rate in this game? And those type of things you want to measure things to find the answer to, whether that's measuring players' sentiment, getting them to rate things on a rating scale, whether that's measuring the number of times they fail on a challenge, whether it's measuring how long they're in the game before they churn and they leave the game. Those type of things we'll want to do quantitative type of measures for. And again, one of the skills that we bring as user researchers is we'll take your vague research objectives, we'll flesh them out, and then we'll combine them with the right method so that you're finding the right kind of data to give you to allow you to make better informed decisions, which is ultimately what we're trying to do, improve your decision making as a designer.
No, exactly. And I think this is again, let me give you one of the quandaries I often get when I try to explain testing to people. It's when I'm doing something like we do a lot of online user testing. We use teams like Playtest Cloud or Anti-Starpress or others. The reason being is we want to eliminate our involvement. We want to facilitate, and it's frankly cheaper. It's not necessarily as good as in person for lots of reasons, but it has its own advantages. But what I often get asked is, why are you only doing 5 or 6 people?
That's a great question. And you hear that all the time, because the assumption is, well, it's only 5 or 6 people, but how can that be reliable? What if these are the 5 wrong people, or these are 5 weird people who have weird opinions? Again, it comes down to what are the type of questions you want answered. So that stats you might hear about learning things from 5 players is usually focused on discovering usability issues.
Yes.
And some academic work that has been done in the past by people like Nielsen and Norman, they found out when they did a big meta review that when you've seen 5 users of one audience do something, you've identified 85% of the most significant usability issues. Exactly. Now, that's a usability issue is different from an opinion. It's not found out 85% of the opinions about this game, or whether 85% of people will like this game or not. You've just discovered 85% of the problems about understanding your game. And we think that's a good time to make some fixes. So you could go on and you could see 10 users, 15 users, and move from 85% of the problems to finding 90% or 95% of the problems. But for return on investment, it's probably a good idea, once you found 85% of the problems, let's have a go at fixing those, and then to get the next 5 users to see if we have fixed them, and also see what problems were obscured by those problems last time that have now been revealed. So again, it comes down to picking the right method for the type of questions you have about your game, which is an art and a skill.
Exactly. Science, folks. But I mean, I think that's absolutely key to it, though, for me, which is it's understanding that no test is perfect. No test is going to give you here's everything you need to do in one go. Job done. Thank you very much. Wrap it up there. Let's move on and ship it. If only. And in fact, actually, I'd argue that games are best as living experiences, which are constantly being updated throughout their entire lifetime over years. But then I'm biased because I wrote a book on games as a service. But the point for me is that I think you've hit the nail on the head. It's like understanding what problems a test is trying to solve. Again, why we choose to have a hypothesis that's testable, that's failable, and we understand what the KPIs are, that what good looks like, and then we conduct that test, and we do get outliers. We do get weird people playing the game. Especially if we do a good job, and I mean that, of recruiting in an unbiased way. And frankly, the language I often use is that truth is an uncomfortable thing we've got to learn to embrace.